She was declared dead 10 years ago. The army gave her a funeral. Her whole family cried over an empty box. But tonight, the plane was crashing and falling fast from the sky. Then the F-22s heard 3 words on the radio that no one could believe. Call sign Ghost. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The night of October 31, 2019 was cold and dark in Anchorage, Alaska. Halloween had come, and the airport was full of people dressed in costumes. There were children in superhero capes, adults wearing witch hats, and groups of friends laughing in funny outfits. Alaska Airlines Flight 66 was scheduled to depart from Anchorage and fly south to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. It was a Thursday evening, and the Boeing 737-900ER was carrying 178 passengers. Most of them were heading to Seattle for the Halloween weekend. There were families, young workers, and tourists. The mood inside the cabin was light and festive. People were taking pictures of each other, sharing candy, and laughing about their costumes. The flight was delayed by about 30 minutes, but nobody seemed to mind. It was a holiday. People were in a good mood. But not everyone on that plane was celebrating. Near the back of the cabin, in the portside row, there was a woman sitting alone in seat 27E. She was in the middle of a 3-seat row, but both seats beside her were empty. Nobody had chosen to sit next to her, and it was easy to understand why, even if nobody could explain it clearly. She wore all black. Black turtleneck. Black jeans. Black leather jacket. Black boots. No Halloween costume. No decorations. No bright colors. Just black, from head to toe. Her dark brown hair, which was almost black itself, was cut short and pushed behind her ears. She wore no makeup and no jewelry except for a simple silver ring on her right hand. She had dark aviator sunglasses on, even though it was nighttime and she was sitting inside a plane. She was reading a book. The book was called The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu. The copy was old and beaten up, with dog-eared pages and a worn cover, like someone who had read it many, many times. She had earbuds in and was not watching the in-flight entertainment. She was just reading, completely still, completely self-contained. The family sitting 1 seat over in 27D and 27F had shifted away from her without realizing it. There was something about the woman that made people uncomfortable. It was not anything she said, because she said nothing. It was not anything she did, because she barely moved. It was something about the way she held herself. The way she sat perfectly still. The way her head would rise slightly whenever someone walked down the aisle, scanning the cabin in half a second before going back to her book. She had the stillness of someone who had spent years learning not to be seen. She looked to be in her mid-30s, maybe 35 or 36. She was thin, almost too thin, like someone who had been through a long illness or had not been eating well. Her ticket said her name was Anna Chen. Occupation, consultant. Residence, Anchorage, Alaska. That was what TSA had seen at the security check. That was what the airline had on file. A perfectly normal passenger with a perfectly normal name. But Anna Chen did not exist. Not really. It was a cover identity, one of several that this woman used depending on where she was going and what she was doing. Her real name, or at least the name she had been given at birth, was Captain Sarah Mitchell of the United States Air Force. And according to every official record in existence, Captain Sarah Mitchell had been dead for exactly 10 years. She had been declared killed in action on October 15, 2009. Her family had held a funeral. There had been a flag-draped empty casket, because no body was ever found. Her squadron had retired her call sign so that no other pilot would ever use it again. The name they had given her in the sky, the name that other pilots knew her by, was Ghost. Sarah Mitchell had earned her wings in 2004. She had trained hard, pushed through every challenge, and by 2006 she had converted to the F-22 Raptor, the most advanced air superiority fighter jet ever built. The F-22 was a stealth aircraft. It could fly faster than sound without using its afterburners. It could turn and maneuver in ways that no other fighter jet could match. It was the most expensive and capable warplane in the world, and Sarah Mitchell was one of the few pilots trusted to fly it in combat. By 2009, she was 26 years old and already a combat veteran. She had flown 67 missions over Afghanistan. She had earned her call sign not just because the F-22 was a stealth aircraft, but because of the way she flew. She had the ability to appear from nowhere, strike her target, and vanish before anyone knew she had been there. Enemy pilots never saw her coming. Even Allied forces sometimes did not register her presence until the threat was already gone. She was a phantom. She was a ghost. Many of the officers who had trained with her said she was the best F-22 pilot of her generation. Then on October 15, 2009, everything changed. She was flying a classified mission over the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The details of the mission were never made public. What happened in the air that day was never officially discussed. But what the Air Force knew was that a surface-to-air missile struck her F-22 and caused catastrophic damage. The aircraft was destroyed. Sarah ejected at 18,000 feet over hostile territory. Search and rescue teams were immediately sent to find her. They found the wreckage of her aircraft spread across a remote mountain valley. They found her parachute tangled in the rocks. They searched for 2 weeks. They never found her body. After 14 days of searching with no sign of life, the Air Force officially declared her killed in action. Her family was notified. The flag was folded and handed to her mother at the funeral. Her call sign was retired permanently. But Sarah had not died. She had survived the ejection. She had come down in that mountain valley, injured and disoriented, in territory controlled by Taliban forces. She was captured within hours of landing. For the next 6 months, she was held as a prisoner in a cave complex in the mountains. Her captors wanted information. They wanted to know about the F-22 systems, the tactics, the weaknesses, the classified details that would help them shoot down more American aircraft. They questioned her every day. They used pain to try to break her. They broke 3 of her ribs. They dislocated her shoulder. They kept her in complete darkness for weeks at a time. They barely fed her. They tried every method they had to make her talk. And she gave them nothing. Not her name beyond her rank and service number. Not her unit. Not her mission. Not a single detail about the F-22. Over and over, in that dark cave, she repeated only her service number. That was all. She went somewhere else in her mind during the worst moments. She learned to become invisible even to herself. She became a ghost in every sense of the word. In April 2010, 6 months after she was shot down, a classified special operations raid hit the compound where she was being held. The SEAL team had been looking for high-value Taliban targets. Instead, they found Sarah Mitchell. She was barely alive. She had lost 30 pounds. She could barely walk. She was taken out of the mountains and transported to a military medical facility. She spent weeks recovering physically. But the decision about what to do with her was not made by doctors. It was made by people higher up in the chain of command. The problem, as those officials saw it, was complicated. Sarah Mitchell was officially dead. Her family had grieved. A funeral had been held. Her name was on a memorial. Bringing her back would mean explaining what had happened, which meant exposing classified details about the mission she had been flying. It would also mean dealing with the media, with the public, with years of questions about why she had been left behind and declared dead when she was actually a prisoner. Beyond that, the intelligence people had a different concern. During her 6 months in captivity, Sarah had been exposed to Taliban networks, communication methods, and operational details that she might not even realize she had absorbed. If she returned to normal civilian life, those details could be compromised. She was a security concern, even though she had never given her captors a single useful piece of information. So they gave her a choice. The first option was to return to the world. She could resume her identity, face years of debriefings and psychological evaluations, deal with the media attention, and try to rebuild a civilian life. She would almost certainly never fly combat missions again. The second option was to stay dead. She would be given a new identity, or several new identities, and she would work for a classified program that had no official name. It was referred to only by its designation, Project Revenant. The program recruited pilots who had officially died but had actually survived. They were given new lives and used for missions that the United States government could not officially acknowledge. They were off the books. They did not exist. And because they did not exist, they could go places and do things that official military assets could not. Sarah chose to stay dead. Looking back later, she was not always sure why. Maybe it was because going back to the world felt impossible after what she had been through. Maybe it was because she was still a pilot at heart, and flying was the only thing she knew how to do. Maybe it was because, in some dark corner of her mind, she felt she had become a ghost, and ghosts did not belong in the living world. For the next 9.5 years, she worked for Project Revenant. She flew operations in Syria, Yemen, and Somalia, in places where the United States officially had no presence. She was very good at it. She was, perhaps, the best operative the program had ever had. Because she was already dead, she had nothing to lose. But it had cost her everything. She had not spoken to her family in 10 years. She did not know if her mother was still alive. She had no friends, no home, no life beyond the missions. She had severe post-traumatic stress that she managed on her own because she could not seek official medical help without revealing that she existed. She slept poorly. She ate irregularly. She had become, in almost every real sense, exactly what her call sign said she was. A ghost. A person who moved through the world without leaving a mark, without being truly present, without truly living. That was why, for the first time in 2 years, she was on a commercial flight. She had been given leave. Real leave, not a transit between missions. Her handlers had told her to rest, to breathe, to spend some time being a person. She had chosen Seattle because she had no particular reason to choose anywhere else. She was using the Anna Chen identity. She planned to walk around the city for a few days, maybe sit in a coffee shop, maybe see the water. She did not have a plan beyond that. She just wanted to feel, for a little while, like a human being instead of a weapon. She sat in seat 27E reading her worn copy of Sun Tzu and trying not to think about anything in particular, while Halloween costumes moved up and down the aisle around her. The flight had been in the air for just over an hour. They were cruising at 37,000 feet over the Gulf of Alaska. Outside the windows, there was nothing but darkness and the occasional pale shimmer of moonlight on the water far below. Sarah had reached the chapter on deception when the aircraft shuddered. It was not a turbulence shudder. Sarah had enough flying experience to know the difference instantly. Turbulence was random and variable. This was a single, deep vibration, like something large had shifted inside the structure of the plane itself. She looked up from her book. Around her, other passengers had noticed it too. There were nervous looks being exchanged. A child in a superhero costume reached for his mother's hand. Then came the explosion. It was massive and sudden, a deep boom that hit them like a fist. The aircraft lurched hard to the left. People screamed. Oxygen masks dropped from the overhead compartments, swinging on their yellow tubes. The cabin tilted at an angle that felt completely wrong. Sarah was already moving before the masks had finished falling. She ripped off her seatbelt and pushed across the empty seats beside her to look out the window on the other side of the cabin. She could see the left wing, and what she saw made her chest go cold. The left engine was gone. Not shut down, not on fire. Gone. It had separated completely from the wing. And the wing itself was damaged. She could see torn metal at the trailing edge, jagged pieces flapping in the airstream. She could see fluid streaming back from the wing root. This was not a simple engine failure. This was catastrophic structural damage to the aircraft itself. In the cockpit, Captain Michael Torres had his hands full of a nightmare. He was 51 years old with 17,000 hours of flight time, and he had never seen anything like what his instruments were telling him. The engine had not just failed. It had departed the aircraft, and it had taken part of the wing structure with it when it went. The hydraulic systems were failing. He had almost no aileron control on the left side. The aircraft was trying to roll and he was fighting it with everything he had. First Officer Lisa Wong was beside him, working through the emergency checklists as fast as she could while simultaneously trying to help keep the aircraft level. The right engine was still running, but it was showing dangerously high temperatures. They might lose that one too. Captain Torres keyed the radio. Lisa was already composing the distress call. She spoke clearly into her headset, "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Anchorage Center, this was Alaska 66. They had suffered catastrophic engine separation. There was structural damage to the left wing. They were losing flight control authority and needed immediate vectors to the nearest suitable airport." The radio crackled with responses. Anchorage Center came back immediately, asking for their position and intentions. And then Captain Torres made a sound that Lisa had never heard from a captain before. A short, strangled gasp. He grabbed his left arm with his right hand. His face had gone gray. He said something that came out as barely a word and then slumped forward against his harness, unconscious. Lisa Wong was alone. She was 37 years old with 8,100 hours of flight time, and she was suddenly the only person in the cockpit of a critically damaged aircraft over the Gulf of Alaska in the middle of the night. She kept flying. She kept the aircraft as level as she could. And she reached for the cabin PA system. Her voice was steady when she spoke, steadier than she felt. She told the cabin that this was First Officer Wong. She said there was an emergency. She said she needed anyone with flight experience to identify themselves immediately. Anyone at all. Sarah Mitchell was already walking forward before the announcement finished. A flight attendant, a young woman who could not have been more than 22 years old, stepped into the aisle to block her path and told her she needed to return to her seat. Sarah stopped. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were steady and cold and utterly without panic. The flight attendant looked into those eyes and saw something there that she could not have named but that she understood completely. She stepped aside. She led Sarah to the cockpit door. Sarah entered the cockpit and assessed the situation in 2 seconds. Captain Torres was unconscious and slumped to his left. First Officer Wong was flying alone, her hands white-knuckled on the controls, the aircraft rolling slightly to the left despite everything she was doing to hold it straight. The instruments told the whole story at a glance. They were losing altitude. They had minimal control authority. The right engine temperature was climbing toward a red line. Sarah moved to the right seat, settling in beside Lisa and pulling Torres carefully back so she could reach the controls on her side. Lisa looked at her. "Who are you?" she said. Her voice was tight but controlled. Sarah answered simply. She said she was a pilot. She said she had Air Force experience. She said she had flown damaged aircraft before and she could help. She said Lisa needed to keep flying the plane and let Sarah manage the systems. Together they could do this. Lisa looked at her for exactly 1 second, then turned back to her instruments. She nodded. Sarah picked up the radio. She thought for half a moment about what to say, and then she said the only thing that made sense. She identified herself as Ghost, assisting Alaska 66 as a military pilot, diverting to Yakutat, and requesting emergency services be alerted. There was a pause on the frequency. Then Anchorage Center came back and asked if someone had just identified using the call sign Ghost. Sarah confirmed it. There was another pause, longer this time. Then a different voice came on the frequency. It was a male voice, calm and professional but with an edge of urgency underneath it. He identified himself as Elmendorf Tower. He said that F-22s from the 525th Fighter Squadron had been scrambled to their position. Estimated time of arrival, 8 minutes. Sarah felt something move through her that she had not felt in a very long time. The 525th Fighter Squadron. That had been her squadron. Those were her aircraft. She acknowledged the call and put the radio down and got back to work. She and Lisa established a rhythm quickly. Lisa flew the aircraft, hands on the controls, managing the physical challenge of keeping a badly damaged plane in the air. Sarah worked through every system methodically, using the knowledge built up over 15 years of flying and combat experience to squeeze every bit of remaining performance out of what they had. She managed the remaining engine carefully to prevent it from reaching the temperature where it would have to be shut down. She adjusted the fuel balance. She coordinated the communications, keeping Anchorage Center and Elmendorf informed while Lisa focused entirely on flying. 7 minutes after the radio call, 2 shapes appeared off the wingtips. They materialized out of the darkness like they had come from nowhere, which was exactly how F-22 pilots were trained to move. Sleek, angular, utterly capable. Sarah looked out at the nearest one and felt something that she had kept locked away for a decade. Longing. Those were her aircraft. That was her world. She had spent the best years of her life flying machines exactly like those, and seeing them now, close enough to make out the details in the darkness, felt like seeing something she had believed she would never see again. The lead F-22 pilot came on the shared frequency. The voice was female, clear and professional. She identified herself as Venom 1 and said she was visual on Alaska 66. She described what she could see from outside. Significant damage to the left wing. The aircraft was trailing what appeared to be fuel. She said, very directly, that at their current rate of fuel loss and descent, they were not going to make Yakutat. Sarah keyed her mic and said she was aware, and that they were doing their best. There was a pause. Then Venom 1 asked a different question. She said, Ghost? As in the call sign Ghost. That call sign had been retired 10 years ago. It had been retired because of what happened to the pilot who carried it. Sarah answered her. She confirmed that she was that ghost. She said she had been shot down, and she had survived, and right now she was trying to save 178 people, so unless Venom 1 had tactical advice to offer, she needed the frequency kept clear. There was a silence on the radio that lasted several seconds. Then the F-22 pilot spoke again, and her voice was different now. She said her name was Captain Rachel Torres. She said that her instructor at weapons school had flown with Sarah Mitchell in 2009. He had told stories about her. He had said she was the best F-22 pilot he had ever seen. He had said she died a hero. Sarah's throat tightened. She stared straight ahead at the instruments. She said, I did die. I just did not stay dead. Now help me save this aircraft. Torres came back immediately, steady and clear. She said, copy that, Ghost. We are here. Whatever you need. The next 18 minutes were the most demanding of Lisa Wang's flying career and among the most challenging of Sarah's. The 737 was fighting them at every moment. The damaged wing was creating asymmetric drag that pulled the aircraft constantly to the left. Every correction Lisa made had to be managed carefully because they had so little hydraulic authority remaining that overcorrecting could make things worse. Sarah monitored every system with the focus of someone who had been in far worse situations than this, who had managed damaged aircraft in combat while people were actively trying to shoot her down. She talked to Lisa constantly, not to fill the silence but to give her information. Altitude. Speed. Engine temperature. Fuel remaining. Distance to Yakutat. She kept her voice even and calm because she knew that Lisa's ability to fly depended partly on the emotional environment in the cockpit, and Sarah was not going to let panic take root there. Captain Torres and Venom 1 flew escort the entire time, calling out additional perspective that was impossible to get from inside the aircraft. She could see the condition of the wing from outside. She could watch the fuel trail and estimate the rate of loss. She provided a second set of eyes that proved valuable more than once. The three of them, 2 women in the damaged cockpit and 1 in a fighter jet outside, worked together as if they had trained together for years. They had not. They were strangers. But they understood each other completely, because they all spoke the same language, which was the language of flight. The approach to Yakutat Airport was terrifying in a way that even Sarah Mitchell, who had faced anti-aircraft fire and enemy missiles and a 6-month captivity in a mountain cave, found difficult. Yakutat had a runway of 7,800 feet. A Boeing 737-900ER in normal conditions needed about 6,000 feet to land safely. That margin of 1,800 feet sounded comfortable in theory. In practice, with one engine barely running, a damaged wing, and degraded hydraulic systems, the margin felt paper-thin. There was almost no room for error. They had to get the approach exactly right. Too high and they would overshoot the runway into the darkness beyond. Too fast and they would use up the runway before they could stop. Too slow and the aircraft would stop flying before they reached the ground. Sarah called every number as they descended. Lisa flew. Torres provided altitude and position calls from outside. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. Torres said they were high on the approach and needed to lose altitude. Sarah told Lisa to cut power. Lisa hesitated for one fraction of a second, because cutting power that close to the ground in a damaged aircraft felt deeply wrong. Sarah said, "Trust me, I have done this." Lisa cut the power. The nose came down. The descent rate increased sharply. Torres called 200 feet. 100 feet. Sarah said, "Flare now." Lisa pulled back on the controls. The nose of the 737 came up. The aircraft hit the runway hard. Very hard. Every one of the 178 people on board was jolted in their seats. But they were down. They were on the ground. They were rolling out on the runway of Yakutat Airport, in Alaska, on Halloween night, and they were alive. Emergency vehicles were waiting. They had been alerted by Anchorage Center and had positioned at the runway threshold before the aircraft even touched down. Ambulances, fire trucks, and airport rescue personnel surrounded the 737 before it had finished rolling to a stop. Paramedics boarded immediately and went to Captain Torres, who was still unconscious. They worked on him quickly and efficiently. He was alive. His condition was serious but stable. He would survive. Sarah Mitchell was out of the cockpit before the last passenger had left their seat. She moved through the cabin quickly, checking faces, confirming that people were upright and breathing, not because anyone had asked her to but because it was what she did. She had spent years operating in environments where you checked every detail before you left, because missing one detail could get someone killed. She found no serious injuries. A few people had cuts or bruises from the hard landing. Several were in shock. But everyone was alive. All 178 passengers and crew. She moved toward the front of the aircraft and then toward the exit. She wanted to disappear. That was her instinct and her training. The emergency was over. Her presence was no longer useful. The longer she stayed, the greater the risk that someone would ask questions she could not answer, or worse, would recognize something about her that connected her to a name that was supposed to be permanently attached to a grave. She pulled her sunglasses back on and moved toward the terminal building, keeping her head down, staying in the edges of the crowd that was forming on the tarmac. Lisa Wong caught her before she reached the door. The first officer grabbed her arm and held it firmly, and when Sarah stopped and turned around, Lisa looked at her with an expression that held both exhaustion and something that went much deeper. She asked again. She said, "Who are you?" Really? Not the cover story. The real answer. Sarah looked at her for a moment. She said, I am nobody. I died 10 years ago. This never happened. Lisa said, you just saved 178 lives. Sarah said, good. Now forget you saw me. She gently freed her arm and turned toward the terminal again. But the F-22s had landed. The two Raptors were parked at the edge of the airfield, and Captain Rachel Torres had already climbed down from her cockpit and was running across the tarmac. She was calling out. She was using the name. Ghost. Wait. Sarah stopped. She stood still in the cold Alaska night air, the terminal lights behind her, and she waited because she knew that running would only make things worse. Torres reached her. The young Air Force captain was breathing hard from the run across the cold tarmac. She stood in front of Sarah and stared at her with the look of someone confronting something they had been told was impossible. She said, you are really her. You are really Sarah Mitchell. They told us you were Kia. We studied your missions at weapons school. You are a legend. Sarah heard those words and felt nothing that a normal person would have felt in that moment. No pride. No warmth. No reconnection with an identity she had left behind a decade ago. She heard the word legend and felt only the weight of everything that word had cost her. The years in darkness. The 6 months in a cave. The 10 years of being no one. The family she had not spoken to. The funerals and memorials attended in her name while she flew nameless missions in skies that did not officially exist. She said, I was. Now I am a ghost. Let me stay that way. Torres said, why? Why hide? You could come back. You could have your life back. Sarah said, I cannot. I am more useful dead. Let it go, Captain. She said it without anger, without bitterness, with the flat finality of someone who had made peace with a decision they could not unmake. Then she walked away. She crossed the tarmac and entered the terminal building and moved through it without looking back, keeping her face away from the cameras mounted on the walls because she knew exactly where those cameras were, the way she always knew where cameras were. She walked out the other side of the terminal and into the darkness beyond the lights. She did not look back. She did not pause. She simply walked forward into the cold Alaska night until the lights of the airport were behind her and there was nothing ahead but darkness, and she disappeared into it as completely and as silently as she had appeared out of it 2 hours before. Like a ghost. Like she had always been. In the weeks that followed, strange stories moved through the aviation community. There were rumors, passed from pilot to pilot, from controller to controller, from one military base to another. Someone had called herself Ghost on an emergency frequency over the Gulf of Alaska on Halloween night. She had helped save a commercial airliner. Her voice had sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The call sign matched a retired designation from the 525th Fighter Squadron. The designation had been retired 10 years ago because of a pilot who was shot down and declared Kia. People who had heard the recordings of the radio transmissions said there was something about the voice. Something that made you stop and listen and feel like you were hearing something that could not be real. The Air Force opened an internal inquiry. Investigators pulled the passenger manifests for Alaska Airlines Flight 66. They found an Anna Chen listed in seat 27E. They ran the name through every database they had access to. The name came back clean, no flags, no red marks, no connections to anything classified. It was a perfectly ordinary name attached to a perfectly ordinary record. Then investigators pulled the security footage from Yakutat Airport. The cameras had recorded everything that happened after the aircraft landed. The emergency response, the passengers coming down the stairs, the paramedics working on the captain, the 2 F-22 pilots on the tarmac. And there was a woman in black in some of the frames. Moving through the crowd, heading toward the terminal. But every time she appeared in a frame, her face was turned slightly away from the camera. Never directly away, never in a way that looked deliberate to a casual observer. But always just enough. In every single frame. As if she had known exactly where every camera was and exactly how much she needed to turn her head to stay unidentifiable. The investigators looked at hours of footage and could not find a single clear image of her face. The inquiry was quietly closed. The official report on Alaska Airlines Flight 66 credited First Officer Lisa Wong with the emergency landing, noting that she had performed with exceptional skill and composure under extreme conditions. There was a brief mention of an unidentified individual who had assisted in the cockpit, described only as a person claiming military flight experience. No name was given. No further details were provided. Captain Michael Torres recovered fully and returned to flying duties 6 months later. First Officer Lisa Wong received a commendation from Alaska Airlines and was promoted to captain within the year. The 178 passengers of Flight 66 went home to their families. Captain Rachel Torres of the 525th Fighter Squadron filed a separate report on what she had heard on the radio that night. In her report, she wrote down everything she had heard and everything she had observed on the tarmac at Yakutat. She wrote the name. She wrote the call sign. She submitted the report through official channels. 3 days later, the report came back to her stamped with a classification level she had never seen before. There was a note attached. It said that the information in the report was classified and could not be discussed. It said that Captain Torres should not speak about the events of October 31, 2019 to anyone outside of proper classification channels. It said that the matter was resolved. Captain Torres read the note twice, then put it in her desk drawer and went back to flying her F-22. But she did not forget. None of the people who had been there that night forgot. Lisa Wong flew her new captain's routes, and sometimes, when she was on final approach at night over dark water, she thought about a woman in sunglasses and all-black clothing who had sat down beside her and said, "Trust me, I have done this," and who had been right. Rachel Torres flew her missions over the North Pacific, and sometimes, when she came in low and fast and nobody saw her until she was already there and then gone, she thought about a pilot who had invented that way of flying, who had carried it to a level of precision that Torres could still only work toward, and who was somewhere out there in the world still doing it, still flying, still invisible, still refusing to stay dead. The passengers of Flight 66 told the story for years. Most of them told it as a close call, a miracle landing, a Halloween night they would never forget. A few of them, the ones who had been paying close attention, told a slightly different story. They talked about a woman in black who had walked to the front of the plane and never come back to her seat. They could not remember her face clearly. They remembered the black clothing, the stillness, the sunglasses, the way she had moved through the chaos without any panic at all. They remembered that she had not been there when they got off the plane. Somewhere in the world, in a safe house or on a military base that did not appear on any official map, a woman named Anna Chen, or whatever name she was using that week, was preparing for her next mission. Her real name was Sarah Mitchell. She was officially dead. She had been officially dead for 10 years, and she would most likely be officially dead for the rest of her life, however long that turned out to be. She did not think about the passengers of Alaska 66 very often, because thinking about the past was a habit she could not afford. But occasionally, in the quiet before a mission, she would allow herself 1 moment. 1 second of thinking about 178 people who were home with their families, who had no idea how close they had come, who were alive because of 17 minutes of work done by a dead woman in a cockpit over the Gulf of Alaska on Halloween night. And in that 1 second, something that was almost, but not quite, a feeling of peace would move through her. Then she would pick up her mission briefing and she would go back to being no one. She would go back to the dark. She would go back to being exactly what she had always been, what she had been born to be, what she had become in 6 months in a cave and 10 years in the shadows. Ghost was not a legend. Ghost was not a story told at weapons school to inspire young pilots. Ghost was not a call sign retired and mounted on a wall in a squadron room in Alaska. Ghost was a living person who had chosen, in full knowledge of what that choice meant, to remain invisible so that other people could remain alive. The world did not know she existed. The world would never know she existed. That was the point. That was the mission. That was the life she had chosen and would go on choosing, mission after mission, flight after flight, year after year, for as long as she was capable of doing what she did. The planes would keep flying. The emergencies would keep happening. And somewhere in the sky above, moving too fast to be seen and too quiet to be heard, Ghost would be there. Watching. Waiting. Ready to appear from nowhere, do what needed to be done, and vanish again before anyone could be sure she had ever really been there at all. What most people did not understand about flying, and what Sarah Mitchell had understood since the very first time she sat in a cockpit at 19 years old, was that it was not about machines. The machines mattered, of course. The F-22 was a marvel of engineering, a piece of technology so advanced that most of what it could do was still classified. But the machine was only as good as the person flying it. The aircraft would do exactly what you told it to do, and if you told it the wrong thing, or if you froze when you needed to act, or if you let fear make the decision instead of knowledge, then the machine became a coffin. What made Sarah exceptional was not that she was fearless. She felt fear. She had felt it in that cave in the mountains when she did not know whether any morning would be her last. She had felt it over hostile territory when a missile lock warning lit up in her cockpit and she had seconds to react. She felt it in the cockpit of Alaska 66 when she scanned the instruments and understood the full picture of how close to catastrophe they really were. The difference was that fear, for Sarah, was information. It told her the situation was serious. It sharpened her attention and made her faster. It did not take control. She did. The years in Project Revenant had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand during that strange, dark leave. She had entered the program at 27 years old, still raw from captivity, still healing from what the cave had done to her body and her mind. She had accepted the new identity and the new mission because, in that moment, it was the only thing that made sense. Flying was the only language she spoke fluently. It was the one place where she still felt completely herself, completely in control, completely alive in a way that nothing else replicated. They had taken away her name, her past, her family, her squadron, and her squadron's memories of her. But they had not taken away her ability to fly. And so she had flown. Mission after mission. Year after year. Getting better and better at something that the world would never acknowledge she could do, serving a country that officially considered her dead. There was a particular kind of loneliness in that life that Sarah had learned not to think about directly, the way you learn not to look directly at something very bright, because looking directly caused damage. She had worked with other Project Revenant operatives over the years, men and women who had also been declared dead and who also lived in the spaces between identities. She respected them. She worked well with them. But she did not allow herself to become close to any of them, because closeness meant attachment, and attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability in her world meant danger. Not just to herself but to anyone who knew too much about her. So she had kept everyone at a precise and careful distance. She had become very good at performing the surface interactions that daily life required, the small exchanges with strangers, the polite navigation of airports and hotels and grocery stores, while keeping everything real locked away where no one could reach it. The F-22 had always been more than an aircraft to her. In the years before her shoot-down, when she had still been Captain Sarah Mitchell of the 525th Fighter Squadron, the F-22 had been the thing she loved most in the world, more consistently and more reliably than anything else. She had spent hours studying its systems, understanding every subsystem and backup and limitation, not because her commanding officers required it but because she wanted to know the aircraft completely, the way a craftsman wants to understand every quality of their best tool. She had flown it to the edges of its performance envelope, the boundaries beyond which the physics became unforgiving, and she had learned exactly where those boundaries were and how to push against them without crossing them. She had earned her call sign honestly. She had been invisible in the sky because she understood, better than almost anyone else, how to use the aircraft's stealth and maneuverability to make herself impossible to detect and impossible to intercept. She had been a ghost in an F-22 before she became a ghost in everything else. Seeing those two F-22s appear off the wingtips of Alaska 66 on that Halloween night had done something to her that she had not expected and had not been prepared for. It was not just the longing she had acknowledged to herself in that moment. It was something larger and harder to name. Those aircraft were the physical embodiment of the life she had given up. Everything she had chosen to leave behind, the uniform, the squadron, the call sign used openly and with pride, the identity as a United States Air Force officer, all of that was concentrated in those two angular shapes moving through the dark sky alongside the damaged airliner. And the voice that came from one of them, Captain Rachel Torres, who had learned from someone who had flown with Sarah Mitchell in 2009, who carried forward the knowledge and the standards of people who had known her when she still had a name, that voice had cut through 10 years of carefully maintained distance and reached something in Sarah that she did not ordinarily allow to be reached. She had kept her voice level and professional on the radio because that was who she was and how she operated. But something had shifted. She did not know, walking away from the lights of Yakutat Airport into the Alaskan darkness, whether that shift was a good thing or a dangerous one. In her world, feeling too much could get you killed. It could get other people killed. The whole architecture of her life had been built on the premise that the ghost was more effective than the person, that Sarah Mitchell the combat pilot was more valuable to the world as an invisible operative than she could ever be as a named, known, officially alive human being with a family and a squadron and a history. She believed that. Or she had believed it, completely and without reservation, for most of the past decade. Now, in the dark and cold outside the airport, with the sound of the emergency vehicles still audible behind her and the stars hard and bright overhead, she was less certain. The doubt did not change anything. She was not about to walk back into those lights and declare herself and undo 10 years of carefully constructed invisibility. But the doubt was there, and it was new, and she filed it away in the part of her mind where she kept things she would need to think about later.